Hello and welcome to the Dingometer, where we tackle tricky issues in learning design and explore the factors that produce excellent learning experiences. And if you're wondering why I pause at the start of that, it's because every time I start Restream, it seems to cut me off. So there's now a Zen pause at the start where I gather my thoughts. All right, so today we are talking about video in learning. And I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by my colleague and business partner and friend, Phil Gom.
Hello, hello. Hello, hello.
Okay, so video in learning, it's everywhere. Obviously, video is everywhere. It's a defining medium of the last 20 years. Videos on social media, instructional videos, content everywhere, video. So you would think that by now there would be a language around video in learning that is productive and intentional. And yet, very often you see instructional videos that don't land, that are everything that an engaging film isn't. So what are some of the problems around video in learning? I think that today it'd be really good to explore why is it that instructional video often doesn't work, and why is that? Because we know a lot about what works in film, and so why doesn't that get pulled through into instructional video? So what are your thoughts, Phil? Opening question.
Well, when we decided we would take this on, I did smile a bit because I do think like, oh, hey, they're talking about video. It's like, yeah, it's like, this ubiquitous sort of technology that sort of like it's probably not terribly exciting in a way, and yet that does beg the question as to why a lot of the sort of learning videos and sort of learning-based resources in that respect that we see are deathly dull. And it reminds me so much of, because I'm very old now, it reminds me so much of when I was very young. And on a Sunday morning, I would creep downstairs, and this was before there was anything on television for children on a Sunday morning. So this was when there were only 3 channels on the television, one of which was BBC Two. And you would go downstairs in the morning, and your parents were still asleep, and the house was really boring. And you think, well, there must be something on telly to watch. And the answer was, there is something on television to watch. It just happens to be an Open University lecture that's on the television, and it was always seemed to be always the same guy, actually, with kind of a Bob Ross explosion of hair and like a kipper tie, a big and in a brown jacket, pointing at a blackboard and talking interminably about something that was no doubt complex and very interesting. But I sat there thinking, wow, oh yeah, look, here we go. This is perfect. This is exactly the stuff that
That's what I remember.
this was the thing. And it was like, so you kind of, in a way, what you've got here is you've got like a person talking, and you've got the person they're talking to, you've got the stuff they're talking to, and all of that is as should be, and yet deeply disengaging and very, very boring. And yet, everybody knows that putting people in front of a video was often shorthand for kind of like engaging them really quickly. So another memory I have is that when it used to get to the end of term school, the great big television on wheels used to get wheeled into the room.
Hooray!
Like, yay! And you were watching kind of like the Goonies or watching E.T. And of course, the reason why those videos were engaging, because it wasn't really about school. But nonetheless, the big, TV on wheels would come in for sort of like sex ed training. I seem to remember there was a video for that because the teacher was too embarrassed to deliver it live. And then there was like interesting stuff around sort of World War II. So the TV on wheels, when it came in, it was always like, wow, we're going to watch a video.
Here's an event.
Yeah, and it would change the vibe in the classroom. It's everybody would sit up, and it was less like being taught. And so between those two positions, you've got kind of like teaching and sort of like video, sort of broadcast being like death, and then the idea that video could also produce these much more dynamic experiences in the classroom. And sort of between those two positions, it almost feels like things haven't moved on very much, really, because I think what a lot of providers have understood is like, well, if you give people a video, that guarantees engagement. And we all know, I think the research is there, that videos are like X% more likely to engage people. People are much less likely to, more likely to read than they are to watch than they are to read. So all the data's there, and yet, why is it that video-based learning resources still seem to have the reputation as being as kind of deathly as those very early sort of Open University videos? So that's my take on it. I'm always puzzled by that. Both really engaging, everybody knows that videos engage, and yet somehow when it comes to the production of these things, when it comes to the sort of the experience of sitting in front of them, it can all, it can be as if it can be so pedestrian. So I don't know what your, because what your experience is of when you've deployed video or video-based thing. What have you noticed around when it's good and when it bombs and when it sort of has the opposite effect that video is kind of supposed to have?
Well, no, yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I think that for me, this all came to a head during the pandemic, when the initial response was, "Oh, we've got to make teaching available. Let's just put all these videos online." And it was almost like the final. It's like the final moment where universities or education providers suddenly got not found out, but it was like, we're going to do this, and then everyone went, that's not really very good, and it doesn't work. And it was sort of like the end of the 1970s Open University video. It was like the final death knell. It's, you can't just put a ton of unedited first person to camera videos online and assume that that is what constitutes good online learning. So you would have thought that would move things on, and I think it has a little bit, because there was this great realization that, okay, if we're going to do online learning, you can't just do that. So I think that moment did highlight very clearly some of the common issues with video in learning, which is, it's too long. You've just put something online and it's unedited. There's no chunks, there's no chapters. Like, how do I know where we are in this video? I've got to watch it from the start to understand what's going on. It's too slow. So it's just explained. So everything, we're just going to talk about everything. There's no emotional journey. There's no pull. It's like, I'm just going to broadcast at you. And so it really highlighted the problems with broadcasting. It also highlighted the importance of personality. Dare I say it? We've talked about this before. It's often you can't talk about personalities in education or in learning because it's all about knowledge. And actually, if you're talking about video, as you say, it's a different medium. It's an engagement tool. So if you put someone in front of a video that may be hugely knowledgeable but is not an engaging personality, you're going to have the opposite effect. It's going to produce the opposite effect. So I think that those kind of things were really came to the fore. Also things like too little variety, and it was just, there wasn't enough. If you think about film, there's all sorts of things going on in a film. It's very intentional. There's like every shot, every scene, every character that is intentional, and it's all designed to produce an effect. So I know you've done a lot of work with video editing over the years and created many a film. So what is it about intentionality then, do you think, that often misses the point in instructional or learning videos?
Well, I will answer that question, but as you were talking about the taboo of talking about personality, I was reminded of I'm going to get this wrong, but there is that sort of adage, isn't there, that when you're on TV, it puts 12 pounds on you. So people look sort of fatter, I think, isn't it right? Look fatter on television. I think it's also true that if you are a bit boring live, then you are very boring when you're on video. And I know that's not really supposed to be discussed, but I think sometimes when you've got the pageantry of the lecture theatre, or you've got kind of like the sort of pageantry of kind of the hallowed halls of academia, where sort of, the onus is on the quiet of the room and having to listen, and you're sort of leaning into the role play of the learned other. That's fine if you've got all of those other bits and pieces around you to perhaps kind of like scaffold that experience. So I've certainly sat in experiences where I've been taught by someone who I know is brilliant and I know they know everything, but I'm sort of giving them the benefit of my doubt, because I'm also thinking, come on, but yes, we're in a lecture theatre. I know we've got 40 minutes and I know that lunch is in a minute, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I think if you strip all of that out and you've just got video, right, and you've just got the vocal range, you've got the sort of the expressive palette of someone's face, you've got their ability to land a concept using words that live in my head, and so on and so forth, then there is nowhere to hide on video. I think video will make pedestrian delivery like 100% more pedestrian. So I just want to just say that, and I know you're not supposed to talk about it, and I think that knowledge is why a lot of people don't like doing video, sort of like, in terms of sort of subject matter experts, or why academia often has been very resistant to recording. I mean, there's lots of reasons why there is the resistance around kind of intellectual copyright, and sort of like discovering that you're a YouTube viral sensation by accident. I understand all of that. But I think one of the big blockers is that people suspect that they are boring. And by boring, I just mean that as in the context not of their knowledge and of their value, but in their ability to engage others. So this engagement thing, this ability to get people to lean towards them and want to learn from them, I think that's a discrete sort of box that you can sort of talk about without suggesting that, without being dismissive around people who have got a lot of subject expertise but perhaps can't deliver it. So I just want to sort of put that out. So I think that video makes boring things more boring. That's absolutely to be clear. So if you've got a boring idea, or you haven't thought about how to land something, if you haven't thought about your intentions, all of that is going to show up on video, because in the end, all you've got is to watch. You can't escape. You can't look out the window. You're just looking there. But yeah, your original question was around intentionality in film, and sort of when you've done as much sort of editing as I have, often when you're film editing and video editing, you're problem solving, right? So what you're doing is that someone has given you a lot of footage, you've got a lot of content, and your first thing is to decide how much of that content is going to help the story exist in the mind of somebody else. So filmmakers overshoot often. It's like hours and hours and hours and hours of content, but that's not a film. Content and footage and duration is like the least of it, because what you have to understand is what is the effect you're trying to achieve in the minds and the imaginations of the recipient of your content. That is your job. And if you're not thinking about the recipient of your content and how your story, your information, your learning point, whatever it is best served, you're going to keep throwing content at people. And I think, this is why I honestly believe that people might wonder why we're talking about video as if it's something new. I think video, and thinking about video, is to absolutely arrive at what you always have to think about when you're developing a scheme of learning, whether you're doing it live, whether you're creating slide decks, whether you're creating a sequence of a whole day. If you've done a lot of editing, you have to realize that the whole expanse of your subject is not the thing you are delivering. Your responsibility is definitely not to deliver the entire 360-degree experience. Your job is to understand how much of that experience your recipient needs in order to want the rest of it. In order for that story or that concept to live in their imaginations after the video stops or after you stop delivering. So the discipline in the editing room is about knowing where knowledge lives, which core concepts can be best served by a little bit more, a little bit less, juxtaposing this with this. It is absolutely that sort of metacognitive confidence around constructing knowledge and experience in the minds of others. That's key when it comes to video. It's absolutely key. It's key to the whole project of designing learning for people.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we did a restream a little while ago around the Kuleshov effect, and looking at the importance of editing, and that was fascinating. I mean, for me particularly, because I'm not a film expert, but it was appreciating the power of the edit and all the work that Kuleshov did to take content out to allow space for the learner to come in, and that is, in my experience, so often missing in instructional video content. It's about, let's just instruct, and this all needs to be in there. And I think we've had conversations before about working with subject matter experts who are very knowledgeable about their subjects, but like you say, their job is to produce a ton of content that someone else then needs to edit, curate, and select and sequence and decide what's actually going to repel learners. If you put too much in there, you're absolutely going to create the wrong effects, and it's going to drive people away. Whereas if you leave stuff out, you pull people in, and that's such a subtle but powerful editing maneuver, I think, isn't it?
I mean, it's just, I mean, you know, editing, storytelling. You speak to directors. I can't remember who I was, whose director's commentary I was watching about when their movies started to exist, and they were fascinating because they said their movie did not exist as they were shooting it, casting it, scripting it. It came into existence only within the editing room, when in those sort of in that sort of decision making was there. I mean, I've just seen from Angeliki, there's a question in the chat about how long video should be. Now, this is a great question, but it helps me talk about something that I'm quite passionate about, really, which is that and speaks to intentionality, because there is a lot of wisdom out there about. In fact, I did some research recently that said that now the idea is videos should be 3 minutes long. 3 minutes long. Now, if an instructional video is 3 minutes long, you really have to sort of like ask yourself, what can 3 minutes achieve? I mean, that can't be. That 3 minutes that's nothing. What can it achieve? So you have to ask yourself, if the wisdom is 3 minutes, then it can no longer be about broadcasting information. It's going to be setting something up, or sort of producing a kind of a sort of a signposting experience towards more knowledge or something. You cannot explicate or elucidate a complicated concept in 3 minutes. So what my argument to that is that I have absolutely watched videos that are much longer than that. And because they have been structured intentionally around that duration, that 15 minutes is not 15 minutes of like, I wish I was somewhere else. That 15 minutes is the perfect duration, because it's producing an effect that's intended in terms of the learner. So I often feel that some of the orthodoxies that I think in learning design particularly, and in education, that people cleave to around, wow, this video is absolutely going to land because it's 6 minutes. It's like, this video is absolutely going to deliver the learning points because it's 2 minutes. I would say to you that if you are looking at duration as the raison d'etre of your intentionality, then things are probably already in the wrong place. I think that sort of, if you have an hour's lecture and that lecture is electrifying because the person performing their expertise is electrifying, and they're using their vocal range, and they're creating space, and they're creating rhythm, and they're doing a lot of things, then that hour could be the most intentional, immersive, effective hour of sort of learning ever. But that's very rare. So that is why all the advice comes in around duration. And I would say that it's good advice, but do not, subordinate your creativity as a sort of and your around a learning designer to something as arbitrary as duration. I think duration is just another part of the tools that you can use to ensure that you're having an effect, the effect that you want to have. I don't know what you think about. You might disagree with me, Tony, around the sort of wisdoms and the kind of the golden rules of sort of learning design and sort of education as it pertains to video. You might have a different view.
No, I think it's an interesting point, because I remember reading that piece of research that Angeliki you suggested in the chat there around. There was a huge study done on millions of YouTube videos and where was the optimal point where learners engaged. But I think to your point, Phil, you have to be very careful as to what question you're asking and what answer do you expect. And I've written down duration is not intention, because I think if you come out of video for a moment, if you look at how let's say a learning experience on a campus is structured, often it's timetabled blocks. So the timetable dictates the duration, and it's quite weird when you think of it that way, because it's like, well, we've got an hour, so that hour is the intentionality is produced by the fact that these learners are going to be in a space for an hour. So you then have to ask yourself, well, if the duration is fixed, then how do we create a journey through that hour? Whereas with video, if it's very easy to fall into that trap of, well, it needs to be as long as it needs to be, or 6 minutes is ideal. But actually, it does need to be as long as it needs to be. It might be 2 minutes, it might be 6 minutes, it might be 90 minutes. As long as it's designed and it's intentional, and there is all those decisions have been made around who are the people watching it, why are they watching it, what's going to engage them, does it need, what if the outcome of this experience is that they need to understand these characters or this concept in huge detail, then 2 minutes is not going to work. So but 90 minutes may still be too long. So you do really have to think about the fact that duration is an intention.
I mean, just for a minute, at the moment, there's been a big discussion around, I think in the BAFTA winning film, The Brutalist, they've got an intermission because it's 3 hours 20 minutes, that film. So the intermission used to be a thing. The intermission is absolute recognition that people need a comfort break, and I think that if you were to do a 90-minute experience from an editing point of view, if the idea that people went into one room and that whole experience was there, that is where you would sort of chapterize, right? You would produce the ability to negotiate. What you wouldn't do if it was doing damage to the arc or the intention of that learning experience. You wouldn't cut it up into lots of little bits. I can't think of anything more irritating than it's a little bit like those TV programs on sort of commercial stations where they do a recap after every ad break because and the first 2 minutes of every ad break is like in the last section. It's like
So, I was here.
I was there. This is driving me absolutely nuts. And if you do this one more time, I'm going to stop watching. So I think, and you can see that practice is based on the fact that people might have missed the first half and so they need a quick recap. And that's sort of like the notion of how to sort of satisfy your sponsors and how to manage a kind of a structure. But I want to say to you, Tony, that, and maybe we talked about this before, but I'm very interested in terms of what's happening with streaming, because with streaming now, sort of because things like Netflix and don't have to satisfy. I mean, they've got ads now in their programs, but they can now, if your story beat, if your experience needs to be 30 minutes to be absolutely precise and have the intentional effect, then it can be 30. It can also be 34 minutes, or it can be 27 minutes, or it can be 20. And there is something, I think, exciting about that idea. And as you say, in sort of campuses and timetables, you see all these customs of duration, which are born out of things that really, arguably, have precious little to do with the intentionality of learning. It's to do with the fact, how are we going to make this stretch? How are we going to make this fit? And I think often they're quite reductionist conversations. But there is another dimension to all of this that I want to get into, because people watching this might think, well, okay, and I'm thinking about resource managers, and I'm thinking about people who aren't necessarily preparing the videos, or perhaps dealing with conversations. People say, hey, you know what? It'd really be great if we had all of these videos. And it's like, well, yeah, all the researchers' videos are great. And it's like, so, and I'm always interested in what the blockers are around what I would consider, and perhaps you would consider, to be best practice. So you and I have edited and put together loads of sort of video-based resources, which I think exhibit best practice, creativity. They are fully intentional. However, why is it then that at the moment, because of sort of the rise of AI, you can see a kind of a conduit for people around optimizing their spend on educational resources? And if they want to do that, they think, well, this video, this is a cheap way to make lots of video. We can do it this way. We'll do it that way, but not that way. I've actually got a lot of sympathy with people who have to cost and think about video resources, because video resources can be a total pain in the arse. They can be a total pain in the arse because they are difficult to fix. So let's imagine that you're doing, you've spent a lot of money, and you've got this sort of landmark set of videos on a particular subject area, and then a month later there's a change. There's a change in language, there's a change in kind of specificity, and suddenly all of that lighting, performance, the frame, the editing, all of that cost and all of that work is suddenly incredibly difficult to update. And I think that happens a lot. And I think that is why a lot of video is the equivalent of Magnolia emulsion. I think a lot of learning-based resources are the equivalent of people creating generic sort of resources that are boring on purpose because they're trying to sort of design out dependency. So the more creative video resources get, the more likely it's going to be that they're going to end up not future-proofed, right? So I don't know what your feeling would be around that, about why is it that video defaults to these kind of like slightly generic, less than impressive, less than impactful experiences. Why do you think we see that, given everything that we've said about how ubiquitous video is and how much research there is? What do you think is the reason for the defaults to these kind of like these like pedestrian expressions of this technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a belief that video adds value, but without necessarily the literacy around what kind of video. So it's, I think there's a danger that there's a danger of just thinking that you're doing something useful, but then, like you say, you're trying to solve too many problems in the use of video. And if we do use video, how do we future-proof it? Because we're going to spend 20,000-30,000 pounds on these videos and we don't want to spend it again. And that's a totally fair enough. That's a fair concern. And yet there are some quite creative, or it's creative. There are ways to produce videos that at least mitigate some of that. You're not going to be able to. So, for example, if you shot a bunch of videos before AI was invented, it's going to be hard to mitigate against sort of seismic shifts. But there are still ways. We've talked about this before around this. You could then spin a whole load of questions or activities around what would happen if AI was suddenly introduced into the scenario. So you can produce intention out of something that was filmed before that. But I think you can go further and focus on what we tend to call the irreducible concepts. So what is less likely to change in this, and how do we produce videos that just provide enough engagement that allow space for the learner? And this goes back to what we were saying earlier around not over delivering. I think if you can, for example, we did some work recently around producing a course that was for games designers, but it was about the mindset. So if we thought, if we're going to shoot these videos, let's talk about the thing that isn't broadly going to change, regardless of how technologies change, tools change. If we focus on the mindset of a games designer, for example, that isn't broadly going to change very much. So create some videos around that are then broadly going to be future-proof. You can then swap out activities, you can swap out tools, you can direct people to different training videos. That all of that then makes your course much more responsive and agile and adaptable, but it also heads off some of the concerns around shooting a whole load of videos. So, well, don't shoot a whole load of videos, just shoot enough to draw people in, and then create the space where you can change things, but also where the learners can then go and explore things and create activities where you involve them. So I think there's a danger of, like you say, just equating video with value, and actually that's a dangerous path, because it'll cost you a lot of money. We've got a question in the chat there from Angeliki. It said also depends on the discipline, and particularly, for example, in medical education, you have long video lectures. But I think you could extend that to any discipline where you have very knowledgeable people who are often world-class researchers. They are very knowledgeable, but they are often not the people to put in front of a video. So your casting is really important. Like if you're making a film, you do not cast people who do not engage the audience. They might be deliberately boring, but that's an intentional choice. It's like, that's, as you said earlier, Phil, it's designed to produce an effect. So it always comes back to, what effect are you trying to produce, and how do you do that with I suppose it's not the least possible expense. It might be quite expensive to produce these videos, but if you're going to produce videos, make sure that you are absolutely sure that content isn't going to change very much, and that you're making decisions that are driven by deep empathy with the learners. Like, what experience are you trying to produce? How is that choice of person or that length of video going to impact the learners? Is it the right thing at this moment in that course? And if it is, then great. But it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't mean let's just film a whole bunch of videos and make a video-based learning
I mean,
course.
video is not a magic bullet, and I think that, and yet, and at the same time, is a lot of people avoid video because it's an expensive. It's an albatross. It's a white elephant. It's like, so you've got video, and the videos didn't work and didn't produce the magic bullet effect. It's like anything else. It's like when the wisdom gets disconnected from kind of like the orthodoxy, and I see that all the time, and I fight it all the time, which is that a bit of research comes in, and often it's and I don't want to, it's like a middle manager moment when a middle manager needs to demonstrate impact and innovation, and they catch hold of the idea that video needs to be 6 minutes, and then suddenly sort of there's like a 3-line whip around it, and then there's this idea everybody does it, and then the videos get ignored, or it's just that it's that problem which I think you see in like that institutional wisdom is often not wisdom, I would say. But just to talk a little bit about this recent work where we absolutely set out to design out dependencies from video content. So we had to decide what the video content was for. The video content was absolutely about one human, not an AI avatar, sorry, but a human who was best placed to warm up the room, to warm up that week, to produce a sense of welcome, to produce a sense of engagement. So there, the intention there was to ensure that the person who was front of house was having that effect in the room. Now, there's a very ignoble practice, which was actually the inspiration for this bit of thinking, and it's something I think about a lot, which is that where you have big sort of entertainment corporations such as Disney, for example, and they want to platform more diverse representations in their stories, in their films, they always are met with the same issue, which is that if they want to sell their films into different sort of areas, like they want to sell to Russia or to China, where cultural views and social mores and morality, those ideas are different, they often sort of produce films that are difficult to sell. And so the solution that the writers come up with, I guess, is to sort of create screenplays where the representation bit, sort of like the gay character or sort of the same-sex kiss, whatever it is, takes place in a moment in the film which does not produce dependencies before or after, which means they can cut their representation. Now, I'm not sort of going, yay, I'm not championing that. But I know that practice, that strategic practice, when you're thinking about all the different ways that this video, this film has to kind of fit, that sort of right at the front, that kind of top level, upriver thinking around how the words on the page, the structure, the design of this video, how many stakeholders does it have to satisfy? And I actually think that that we went in thinking about how can we produce a suite of video resources that for the teaching and learning team for that institution, they don't go, yay, oh God, because they know that like in a year's time or 2 years' time, because the presenter person mentioned a particular type of software, that's got to be cut because that software is obsolete, or because this person mentioned X is suddenly unmentionable and it's got to be cut. So in that knowledge, we sort of approached the design of that course. So the videos were a part of a constellation. So it's this constellation idea, which is that this video orbits this slide deck. This slide deck orbits the VLE. The slide deck is doing a specific piece of work. The VLE is doing a specific piece of work. The video is, they're all orbiting each other, and their job is, of course, to produce the learning experience. But their other job, that sort of metacognitive sort of stakeholder job, is to not produce a white elephant effect. It is to sort of ensure that these resources have a life. And that's an absolute job of, before you even begin to design for learning, before you even begin to get your hands on those resources, that you're thinking like that. You're thinking both as the learner and as the provider of the learning. and you're looking at both of their pain points. You're looking at their kind of, you're empathizing in two directions. And certainly I would say that this recent piece of work we've done feels like it does within it have the answer to how you can have your cake and eat it, how you can get your investment into your videos, how you can have this creative performative space that doesn't then become horribly outmoded or redundant, sort of like in a year's time. So it's been an exciting scheme of work for us, because it is about a three-dimensional game of chess, playing this three-dimensional game of chess with these resources to produce this effect that is positive in the lives of all the people who either have to receive it or provide it.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot recently about the importance of the end-to-end experience, and I think that's another factor that can often get in the way here, because if you are able to design a course end-to-end and say, right, this is the narrative arc, these are the moments, the touch points, there's going to be some video here, there's going to be some activities here, that's great. And it may start off like that, and then it gets inherited by someone else, or someone else comes in and they change part of it, or someone else is only responsible for a section in that, and that bit gets swapped out. And so you can see you can very quickly lose the consistency of the surface tension of that whole experience, and it sort of turns into a series of disjointed activities that don't add up and they don't produce the intended effect. So being able to maintain ownership or control of that end-to-end experience, like you would in a film, you wouldn't give a film to 3 editors and then say, you edit that bit, you edit that bit, and you edit that bit, because you'd end up with something that absolutely didn't work. So I think this is why looking at what works in film is so important, and there are some key things that I think often are overlooked in educational videos, and it is things like getting your casting right, using a range of characters. There was another comment in the chat there around, if you've got boring professors, what do you do? Well, sometimes you might be able to employ an actor to deliver some of that content, but equally, if you don't have any choice and you do have to work with, sadly, someone who's pretty boring, then maybe you do make an intentional decision around duration and say, let's not make an hour lecture, let's make a 3-minute lecture. And that's where a short video actually mitigates some of the problems.
I mean, yeah, just to be clear about that, Tony, is that if I was in that position, then it would be, I would work very closely with that sort of that SME, and I would say, well, the point of this video is to open the door into complexity. So your job is to sort of open the door. So your 3 minutes isn't about, oh, and by the way, blah, blah, blah. It's why this is important, why we're learning this, how I felt when I first learned this concept. Because one of the other bits of research around video is personal stories. And this is particularly true of AI. The idea that people are going to be somehow excited beyond the gimmick of sitting in front of a pristine AI generated sort of presenter. I mean, it's just crazy. It's just, to me, that's nuts, because the research is about the Velcro that gets people to engage is an entirely human Velcro. It is around someone sharing what it was like when they felt something, whatever. It's like leading with a story. I think that if I was working with someone who wasn't a natural conveyor of their information, I would find things that they were comfortable with. I would spend some time to get them to think about when they what excited them. That would be such a great use of that video. It would kind of like be the front of house for a more sort of perhaps sort of like slide deck based thing, but you would just pepper those sort of 2 minutes through. And I think I can well imagine how that relationship and that work would begin to change that person's view on facilitation. The whole thing would start to change with that relationship with that person. So that's what I would do. I would say, okay, I don't want you lecturing. I want you to talk to these. We'll use the video to explain why this stuff's important. And then, we'll let another third-party video do that work, or do the heavy lifting, or whatever. But absolutely bring them in and make them sort of the maitre d' of the whole dish that they're serving, I think.
Yeah, because it is often value comes through proximity to expertise, and so don't take those people out of the picture completely, because often, like as you say, if you've signed up to a course because it's taught by world-class researchers, there's value there. But as you say, if if those people are not going to engage you for an hour, then don't create that situation. Just create 2 or 3 minutes regularly of proximity to that expertise, little bite-sized concepts, interesting insights, anecdotes, and thread those through the experience and use other ways to engage learners. So yeah, again, it always comes back to this idea of being intentional and working, getting the best out of the resources that you've got, I think. So I think there's probably just to round this off then, so just some takeaways for creating good instructional videos. Definitely casting. Think about who you're working with and why, and as we were just saying, how to get the best out of that person. Use a range of characters if possible, because I think in terms of providing different ways into an experience, learners will engage with different people. They might connect with one expert or actor, or not with another. So different characters can really help. Length, as we said, with duration, really think about the optimal length. And it doesn't mean that long is bad and short is good. It's what's the optimal length based on the resources that you've got and based on the characters that you've got. Different shots and scenarios, absolutely. So rather than it just being, watching 6 hours of somebody talking at you, like, please, no, kill me now. So thinking about how you can use editing to vary how you present that content, how you slice it up, how you cut it in different ways with case studies or different angles, different perspectives. Definitely not over explaining. I think that's been a big and interesting one for me over the last few months. That idea of just only put in as much as you need in a video to leave space for the learner. And I think that is so often forgotten in terms of obliterating learners with content. And actually, it's almost like two magnets repelling. The more you put in, the more you push people away. And I think, and as he said, for not creating dependencies or designing out dependencies as much as possible. So don't avoid video just because you think it's going to produce dependencies, but look at how you use narrative and you use scripts to design out those dependencies and focus on things that really matter.
Yeah, I mean, they're all excellent points, and I would simply say it's like why are you two questions I would ask myself is, why are you avoiding video, and also why are you using video? So they're both interesting questions, because all the research is that video used effectively and in a joined up way, so it kind of catalyzes the curricula, that it kind of constellates in an interesting way. The video is like does some heavy lifting for you. Really bad videos won't do that. And just because you've got some videos doesn't mean the constellation is working, doesn't mean that you've got that machine working. And I think that sort of mechanistic, reductionist view on the existing research and knowledge about why things work, and that this guarantees X, and that this effect is absolutely sort of underwritten by something like duration. All of that needs to be interrogated, not for pure disruption reasons, but is it going to work for you? Is it the right mode to produce an effect in this learning environment around this subject matter? Is video decorative? Are using it decoratively? If so, why? Or could it be a muscle that sort of moves and produces an effect? And I think it's literally just taking a moment to stop expecting video to do anything for you. It's like video is like, it's as ubiquitous as saying, I don't know, digital or online, or it doesn't. All of that language, it needs to be repossessed and looked at, and like, what does it mean for you? How can you leverage it to produce experiences that are actually going to move the needle? Because you can have a video-based course, you can have all of those things, you can have learners, they can be watching it, and you are still achieving nothing. You're just, it's a conga, or it's a conga. I just think that these things could be, it all needs to be joined up and intentional. And I think that's where I think you can be creative, and you can start to feel, perhaps, again, walking with a bit more agency into these quite well-trodden spaces, really. These sort of like, oh, yawn video, whatever. It's like, actually, it's got a job of work to do, and it can do it really, really well.
Thanks, Phil. Lots of great advice in there. I'm going to go and slice this up and slice it in 6 ways, but put chapters in it, carve us up, dress us up, put us on YouTube, put us on Instagram. So no, great tips and advice there. Thank you very much. And if you're watching this recording, thank you for watching the recording. And if you do find this interesting, do check out some of the other explorations into learning design and course creation that we have on the blog, where we do unpack different aspects of how to produce engaging learning experiences. So have a great weekend. I hope you found this useful. Thanks, Phil.